welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a political story that, honestly, sounds like it shouldn't be possible. Imagine this, a communist party rising to power and holding it for more than 30 years, right in the middle of the world's biggest democracy. Yep, we're talking about the Communist Party of India Marxist, or as it's known, the CPIM. I mean, that's the big question, right? How on earth did a party with the hammer and sickle as its symbol pull off something so incredible, so unprecedented in a democratic system? Well, to get to the bottom of that, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay, so to really get the CPIM's story, you have to understand that it wasn't just born. It was born out of a rebellion. It was the result of a kind of ideological civil war that literally ripped Indian communism right down the middle. And this timeline here, it really shows you how that pressure cooker was building. You had these tensions just simmering for years and years. But then, the 1962 war with China, that just cranked the heat all the way up, and everyone had to pick a side. The whole thing finally boiled over in 1964, when 32 leaders just got up and walked out. It was a huge deal. And by November of that year, in Calcutta, it was official. The CPIM was born. Indian politics would never be the same. So here's what the fight was all about. You had the original Communist Party, the CPI, let's call them the right, and they were closely aligned with the Soviet Union. Their strategy was, hey, let's work with the ruling Congress Party. But for the breakaway group, the CPIM, or the left, that was a total betrayal. They said, no way. For them, the ruling class wasn't a potential partner. They were the enemy, basically an arm of imperialism. So you can see, this wasn't just some small political squabble. It was a deep, fundamental clash over what it meant to be a communist in India. And this new party, wow, it wasn't just born from a messy breakup. It was basically born into a war zone. I mean, from day one, it was a fight for sheer survival against the full power of the state. Now, one of the main weapons used against them was something called President's Rule. You can think of it like a constitutional kill switch. Seriously. It's a provision that lets the central government in New Delhi just step in and dissolve an elected state government. Poof, it's gone. And you better believe it was used pretty ruthlessly to squash any opposition, especially the communists. And I mean, they were truly under siege from every single direction. You had the government throwing thousands of their members and leaders in jail, often without any trial. Then, out on the streets, their protests were met with really violent police crackdowns. And if that wasn't enough to deal with, a radical rebellion actually erupted from inside their own party, the Naxalbari uprising. That led to this bloody internal feud that split them all over again. They were literally being squeezed from the outside, the inside, everywhere. But here's where this story gets really incredible. Because despite all that pressure, I mean all of it, the CPIM didn't just survive, it actually thrived. Out of all that chaos, it started to build these political fortresses in a few key states. And these weren't just temporary gains. These were fortresses that would last for a generation. Just look at this number, 34. That's how many years in a row the CPIM-led front ruled the state of West Bengal. Let that sink in. This wasn't some one-party state with no opposition. This was the longest-serving, democratically elected communist government in the history of the world. It's an absolutely staggering achievement. So you gotta ask, how did they pull it off? How did they build these strongholds? Well, it came down to concrete action that changed people's lives. In West Bengal, you had leaders like Jyoti Basu rolling out Operation Barga, which was this massive, revolutionary land reform program. Then down in Kerala, they built the Left Democratic Front, an alliance that's been so successful it's still trading power back and forth today. And over in Tripura, they dominated for 30 years by building their base through tribal welfare. Different states, different strategies, but the same result, long-term power. And you really can't overstate the impact of something like Operation Barga. This quote says it all. It wasn't just a policy. It was a complete reshaping of who held power in the countryside. We're talking about giving land rights to millions of sharecroppers who had nothing. You're not just passing a law at that point. You're fundamentally rewiring a society that had been feudal for centuries. That is how you build a rock-solid, loyal base that sticks with you for decades. But, even the strongest fortress can't stand forever. After reaching these unbelievable heights, the cracks started to appear. And it wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, steady erosion of their power that would eventually lead to a pretty dramatic fall. And this chart? Well, the numbers really tell the whole story, and it is a stark one. Look at their peak in 2004, 43 seats in the national parliament. That made them a genuine kingmaker in Indian politics. Fast forward just 10 years to 2014, and they're down to 9. By 2024, just 4. You're literally watching a major political force in full retreat. The moment that really symbolized the end came in 2011. That's when their greatest fortress, West Bengal, finally fell after 34 straight years. It was just the end of an era, and not just for the party, but really for the entire Indian political landscape. So even with their power at the ballot box fading, you can't ignore the fact that decades of rule left a huge, lasting mark on India. Which brings us to the big question. What is their legacy, really? When you really break it down, their legacy is pretty clear, and it's got a few key parts. First, land reform. They pulled off some of the biggest land reforms India has ever seen, empowering millions. Second, labor rights. They built these incredibly powerful trade unions that gave a voice to workers. Third, social welfare. In places like Kerala, they pioneered a model that poured money into public health and education. But maybe the biggest thing of all, they proved that a communist party could play by the rules of democracy and win. And not just win once, but govern effectively and hold on to power for a whole generation. Which leaves us right here with this final question. The CPIM wrote a fascinating, improbable chapter in political history. They proved that, yes, communism could find a way to thrive inside a democracy. But now, as India's political world keeps shifting and changing, what's next? What is the future for this once mighty party and for leftist politics in general in the biggest democracy on the planet? That, for now, is the great unanswered question.